Hey, homies and goats. And for those of you that don't know what that reference is about, I have a young friend who brought me some Diet Coke bottles that have labels on them. That and one of them says homies, the other one says goats. I'm an old goat because I'm just an old goat. The goats that I refer to, and I refer to you as homies and goats. And of course, you know, homies means friends, but goats mean greatest of all time. And every one of you is a goat at something. You know, the sad thing is we're all idiots and ignorant about some things, but we're all experts on others. And I want to encourage you to look at this old geezer, this old what is it, and think, you know, maybe some of what he's done wrong I can learn from and get some things right. And I've learned a few things. I like to say that I'm about 10 years behind. The chaos that was a big part of my upbringing for about 15 of my first 19 years on this planet put me way ahead of the game in certain areas, but way behind in lots of others. And most of those other areas are things that relate to being a functional, responsible adult. But I'm getting there, and I'm still working on it. And the good news is God's working on it too, and He's making a lot more progress with that than I am. Tonight I want to, and it is pretty late. It's about 11 o'clock at night, which is way past my bedtime. That used to be an early evening, but anymore, you know, about 8 o'clock, I'm starting to get heavy lidded. I'm sure my eyes are showing that I'm a little sleepy at the moment. But someone who has watched some of my videos sent a request kind of roundabout to address the topic of introverts. And I've given some thought to that in the past, but this is mostly going to be a rambler. You know, most of mine are, but particularly when I am thinking out loud about something that I've never really given a great deal of consideration to. The consideration I've given to the topic of introversion has been in regards mostly to its definition, because, and this will be a surprise to some people. In fact, they'll say no way. But in reality, I'm an introvert, and we'll get into some of why. Now, there are contexts in which I'm pretty forward and I'm pretty fluid, but you just throw me into a group of strangers and I'm gonna find me a quiet corner if I can. And I'll probably be standing in that corner looking for somebody who looks like they need a friend, and I may go approach that person and see if, you know, they want me to be that friend, at least for that moment. But social things are not my thing. I prefer my people one-on-one as to groups. And in fact, it's pretty hard to get me to go to a social outing. And if I do, there's a good chance I'll be the first one to poop the party. So anyway, let's talk about introverts a little bit. The context in which I've thought about introversion is in regards to this definition. And I don't know that this is, and I didn't look this up in the dictionary. I tend to prefer definitions that come out of life experience, whether it's mine or others. And I had a fairly involved discussion, maybe a couple discussions with a friend 2 or 3 years ago about extroversion and introversion. And I did do a little bit of research, but I don't remember specifically what the dictionary said, or if I even looked at the dictionary. But the definition that I like best of introverts is that an introvert is a person who gets their batteries charged by being alone. Now, there are some people who live very privately and who are considered introverts, but their batteries are not charged by being alone. An extrovert, by extension of that, is somebody who gets their batteries charged by being around lots of people. Again, that's not me. I want to talk about 3 reasons that someone might be introverted, and I'm sure this isn't exhaustive. But I promise the next time I think about it after having this little discussion with you here on this channel and thinking out loud about it, and especially if you happen to decide that you want to comment or respond, you'll deepen and sharpen my understanding. So the first reason someone might be an introvert is just temperament. I think of a friend of mine who has 4 children, and they're all so different. And one of them, the one who really is probably, and they're all super intelligent. Mom and dad both real intelligent, and all 4 kids are just off the charts intelligent. But the one who probably, if I had to guess, which one is actually the most intellectually gifted, I would say it's the quiet one. And that's not always the case, but some people, by their temperament, they are so focused and so intense in their concentration on their environment, and particularly the people in their environment, that they're studying. And they're studying as one standing apart for the most part. Excuse me, I'm going to have to cough here. I know that makes for good video, and it makes for great editing if I knew how to edit, but I don't. And I really don't care. So, oh well, here we go. So anyway, a lot of times people who we think of as being by temperament introverts are people who are just so intent on observing and taking in their environment that they're really standing somewhat apart, and it hinders them from being engaged, and they're kind of oblivious a lot of times to the fact that they're just an observer. They're not really a participant in the party, they're just there to observe. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's amazing the insights those people have. And when those people do talk, when those people do engage, a lot of times what they have to say and their insight is so powerful. A lot of times they're intuitive. They talk about women's intuition. I really believe in that. But I think the reason women are typically more intuitive than men is that women pick up more data points in general. But I think a lot of temperamental introverts, in other words, introverts by temperament, are people who just pick up exponentially more data points, and they're constantly processing the information they're taking in, and it really kind of precludes them being too personally and directly immediately involved. No problem. There's nothing wrong with that. Those people, again, a lot of times they're intellectually gifted, and when they do apply what they've learned and observed, it's powerful. It's worth hearing when they do speak. The second thing that I think causes people to be an introvert, at least some of the time, and this isn't always the case, but hardship. And that hardship can come in various forms, but I'm going to narrow it down to just two, and they don't cover everything, but they cover a lot of things. The first one's health. Isolation, because you're not physically able to participate in the hubbub around you, makes you very self-conscious, and it makes you feel like you're a being apart. You're a world apart. Like being in a bubble. There's a glass barrier between you and the world that's around you, and when you can't participate, it's really hard to feel like you're part of the team, a part of the gang, a part of the scene. And so that can cause introversion. Another thing is wealth. If you happen to live in a fairly affluent area, and we do, and we're not terribly affluent, but particularly our two biological kids, when they were going to school here, they were very aware that their clothes, unless they have me hand-me-downs from my niece and nephew, which fortunately for a lot of years they got those, but their clothes just didn't measure up against what their peers and classmates were wearing, and they were, they weren't the only ones aware of that, and that made them self-conscious. And self-consciousness is a pretty powerful driver for introversion. And I'm sure there are other areas that don't fall under that health or wealth category, but things that just cause you to feel like you're apart, you're an outsider. And I guess kind of fitting both of those, if you are living in a family that's got serious challenges, and I did growing up, that really kind of leads to the next one. And these kind of sometimes, I'm pretty sure, are linked to one another at some level. But I think some people aren't just suppressed by temperament or by hardship, but some people are suppressed by their social situation. I was a misfit at home, and I was a misfit at school. I was kind of the black sheep of the family. I was always the one who was testing the boundaries, and I was the one who was uncomfortable with rules, and I was the one who didn't like authority because I had observed that authority didn't always represent itself very well. And so both at home and at school, when authority was fair and just, I could be compliant, not always, but I could and put forth some effort. But especially at school, man, if a teacher did something unfair, I was just merciless at throwing it at them. And anyway, that's not what made me socially suppressed, but just growing up in a place where you didn't really fit at home and you knew you didn't fit at school, again, after a while, you begin to try to keep your head down socially. You begin to withdraw from social situations because when you insert yourself into a social situation and you have don't really have a basis for real transparent interaction and relationship at home, which really should take place in the first few years of your life and give you a good foundation for socialization the rest of your life. When you don't have that, it's really disruptive. And so when you then try to insert yourself in other social situations, it doesn't take you very long to find out that you're the butt of the jokes because you're just weird, dude. And I am. I was and I am. And I kind of accept that now. And I've discovered that God's big enough, he can use weird folks too. So anyway, those three things. Some people are introverts primarily because of temperament. Some because of the hardships that have isolated them. Some because they just don't have a real natural flow and comprehension, apprehension, internalization, assimilation of social processes. And it ain't all bad. Sometimes there's way too much, we talk about peer pressure, there's way too much expectation that kids will be able to fit in. Some of the best kids I know do not fit in. And on the other hand, I know some extroverts who, it doesn't matter where you throw them, man. It's like a cat. You can throw him up in the air and put a good spin on him, he's still going to land on his feet. I know people that are that way, that are children, but they're just that socially malleable and adaptable. It's not wrong to be the other end of the spectrum from that. So anyway, here's where I want to try and encourage you a little bit. I don't care who you are. You're a relational being. And as such, God has planned for you to have a sphere of influence. Now, that does not mean that you've got to have a public forum where you stand in front of other people and make things happen. It might mean that. One of my favorite heroes in the Bible is a guy named Moses. And I'll just tell this little story. And you don't have to be a believer for this to make sense to you and to be of value to you. Moses was adopted. He was a little Israelite baby, and he was adopted by the king's daughter. And as the king's daughter, he was in a pretty cushy place. And he had all the advantages of being the king's grandson. And at 40 years of age, when he saw the difficulties that his his native people were undergoing, he felt like as the grandson of Pharaoh, he was in a good position to do something about the oppression that his people were suffering. He's kind of in both worlds. Well, at the age of 40, he went out to try to do something about that, and I won't go into all the details, but it took him exactly 2 days to fail. So he went from being on the top of the bubble to literally running for his life. And it only took him 2 days of effort trying to fulfill his calling. And he's a fugitive. He spends the next 40 years literally chasing sheep around the desert. He was a shepherd for 40 years. 40 years later, God says, "Hey, Mo, I'm ready now. You're up." Not me, God. Moses, I don't know what his temperament was like before, but now all of a sudden he's thick of speech. He can't talk well. He didn't know anything about it. He's already tried and failed. Why would I go try again, God? Well, because God told you to. So I like to say it only took Moses 80 years really to get prepared for the job God had for him to do. He thought he was ready at 40. He thought it had only taken 40 years. No, it took twice that long. Man, I'm working on it. I'm only 66, so I've got 14 years to go. But one of the takeaways from that is that God uses the things in our life as preparation for what he wants us to do. And we all have a sphere of influence. And Moses became the most influential figure in Israelite history up till the time of Jesus Christ coming on the scene. And the Jewish people even today highly, highly revere Moses, probably above all their other messengers and prophets of God. So you have a sphere of influence, and it might be a little intimidating to find it, but keep your eyes open Be humble, be pliable, ask God to show it to you, and ask God to introduce it to you and you to it, and trust Him to equip you to do what He wants you to do. That's what He did with Moses at the age of 80. So when you find that sphere of influence, here are some things that you need to be aware of. Communion is the best part of human relationship. You know, I marvel at people who can talk to God for long periods of time. That's just not me. I'm pretty ADHD. But I have discovered that sometimes my wife and I can get on the phone, and after we've discussed everything we want to discuss, we don't want to hang up, but we're still on the phone. We're not saying a thing, but there's a sense of connectedness and communion just by being on the phone together. I'll bet you got a phone. I don't know who you are, but you probably have a phone. And you probably have somebody that's lonely that you know of in your life. Call them. And if you have 2 or 3 minutes of silence after you both said everything you know to say, then just say, hey, thank you for taking my call today. Thank you for hanging out with me and for communing with me. I feel like I'm connected to somebody right now, and I needed that. I hope it's been as good for you as it's been for me. So people need to know that they've been heard. They're encouraged just to know they've been heard. I was with a friend earlier today who's going through some major transition in business, and he was frankly overwhelmed, and I didn't say anything of value that I could think of, as far as I'm concerned. I certainly didn't tell him anything he never knew before, but I was able to just listen and listen intently. And when we were getting ready to part company, he said, I feel so much lighter. This has really helped me a lot. And, I think it was just because he was heard. He had the opportunity to think out loud, to express his concerns, can express his worries, his fears, his reticence about what the next couple of months holds. And somebody listened. And he walked away encouraged. It wasn't what I did. It was that I was there. Another little thing, and I don't know where this came from, but I love it, and that is that the important things in life are caught, not taught. So whether you realize it or not, you don't have to have monumental insight and wisdom. If there's calm, if there's a measure of peace, and I'm not talking about perfect peace or perfect calm, if there's a measure of hope, if there's a measure of assurance that as bad as it is, it's okay, and you're around people who are struggling, they're going to soak some of that up. That's essentially what happened with my friend. And actually, I just remember it was yesterday, not today, that I had lunch with this friend. So major correction there. So anyway, once you find your sphere of influence, which is whoever you have contact with, even if it's just the person at the drive-up window at McDonald's, I can't tell you the connections that have been made, and I don't have to force those connections. I'm just open to them, and it's amazing what's happened with some of those. But once you find that sphere of influence, communion, listen, be a good listener, and you'll be surprised the influence and the power you have. And then realize that the important things in life are caught, not taught. So share just who you are, the good and the bad. One of the problems with our society is we're great at patting ourselves on the back and telling everybody about our victories. We're not so great at telling people where we're struggling. It's not farce when I say that I don't have all the answers, but I've made most of the mistakes. I really mean that. Some of them I haven't acted out, but man, this old black heart of mine has done everything wrong that it can imagine to do. And then the last thing I want to just encourage, and this is kind of a practical step. Look for somebody that's a half step ahead of you, not somebody that's arrived. I've come to the place where I tell people, you need to find somebody you can trust, but not completely. In fact, don't even trust me completely, because I don't trust me completely. I know that I have vulnerabilities. I know that something I might not do today, tomorrow I might, if the circumstances are right or wrong, as the case may be. So form a human chain. Find somebody that's a half a step ahead of you and somebody a half a step behind you. Reach forward and reach backward, and form, and it doesn't have to be a socially based group, but form a little group of people who are mutually strengthening and encouraging one another. When somebody who knows they haven't arrived but has a little piece of insight they can give you reaches back to hold your hand and pull you forward, it strengthens them, and then they're better able to pull you forward. That's a wonderful thing. So, you an introvert? Hallelujah. God uses those folks too. And even if they're goofy introverts like me, who, have little pockets of places where I can, just blow up and be crazy and talk like I have no inhibitions at all, I'm still an introvert. And God is big enough to even use goofballs like me. Hey, I wish you well.